Hello everybody, how are you doing? And today I'll be covering C1.2 cell respiration from IB Bio, and this video will only be an SL portion only. I'll link the HL in the description when I finish it, of course. And yeah, I'm pretty excited. This is going to be like a new video format, so I hope you guys like it, and let's get right into it. Alright, so first of all, we're gonna get started with the structure and function of the ADP. So the ADP, it's the abbreviation for adenosine triphosphate, and its main function is to serve as the energy currency of the cell. So it carries energy, and we'll get a bit more on that later. But now you need to know the structure of it, and it'll help with like remembering the name of it. So the pentagon in the middle is the ribose, and it's the OSE, so you know it's a sugar, and it's a 5 carbon sugar ribose. And this green thing here, it would be the nitrogenous base adenine. So that's where the adenosine comes from. And of course, you have these three very important phosphate groups. So it's a triphosphate. There are three phosphate groups. Okay, and these phosphate groups are all negatively charged in between them. And that's important to know because it creates the unstable covalent bonds in between them. So it's very easily broken. And it's also known as the high energy bonds. You know, you can also call them that. And because these bonds are easily broken by hydrolysis, and breaking down the ATP is known as an exergonic reaction, and that means it's releasing energy. So that's where the function of it as the energy currency come from, and we'll get a bit more into that later. All right, and we know that ATP is really important to a lot of things in our body, and here are some specific examples that would be nice to know, like our life processes that require ATP or the energy it carries. So first of all, you're gonna need the active transport. So that's when we use energy to pump things from low concentration to high concentration through the membrane, and that kind of goes against the principles of osmosis. So it requires energy to do so, and that's powered by the ATP. Next, we also have this anabolism. So when you join two small molecules, it's a part of metabolism that our body needs, and that requires energy. So ATP powers that. Well, I think this is supposed to be cell movement, and it also helps with, I didn't even bother to draw this, but it also helps with chromosome movement. So just try to imagine the movement of the chromosomes, I guess. All right, and now when we talk about ATP, we also want to mention its evil cousin, ADP. So what ADP stands for is this D means diphosphate. Di, right? That's two. So you can see there's only two here. And so ATP is like a rechargeable battery. And the way you get energy is by using hydrolysis, right? You want to add water to break the high energy bonds, and you will lose the phosphate group away. You go from 3 to 2. And by doing this, this becomes an exergonic reaction. So when you break down ADP, it releases the energy that you will need. And when you go from ADP to ADP, it's rechargeable like a battery. So you need to add energy back to get that phosphate group back in there. And, you know, that's when, for example, you eat something and then you will use the energy that you eat to store it in ATP so it can be broken down to be used later. So it's pretty interesting. All right, now moving on to C1.2.4 to C1.2.5. It's going to be about ADP and cellular respiration. So cellular respiration, it's the method that most living organisms use to synthesize the ATP, the energy that we use. And it's you can do it with a lot of different things like fatty acids, or you could do it with like different proteins. But right now we'll focus on one of the most main methods, and I think it's probably easier because I didn't learn about the other ways, but the glucose. So how does cell respiration work through glucose? So you want to keep in mind this formula where uh, this glucose gets oxidized and oxygen is reduced. And um, it's more of a chemistry concept. And I'm sure I have another video about that, right? But here's a nice little thing to help you remember oil rig. So oxidation is loss and reduction is gain. And we're talking about electrons, of course. But when this reaction occurs, you can see that there's extra energy produced. You're breaking down this big glucose molecule, and when you're breaking down big molecules, you get extra energy out of it. And we'll be looking at how this energy is created through ATP and the steps that will follow, which includes glycolysis and the stuff on the other slides. So exciting. Okay, so when we're talking about cellular respiration, we want to keep in mind there's two types. This anaerobic and aerobic. So right now we're gonna talk about anaerobic, and that's when you don't need any oxygen. Don't need any oxygen, and all cellular respiration starts in the same way, and that's called glycolysis. So this glycolysis, it happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. So the glucose molecule enters through the membrane, and this just happens directly in the cytoplasm. And what happens is some enzymes, they take this six carbon, this is a glucose, it has six carbons, and they break it down to these pyruvates. So each pyruvate has three carbons and make two of them. And what happens here is you actually need to invest some energy into it to get this reaction going. So you need to use up 2 ATP. You have to use up 2 ATP to get this reaction started, but by breaking down a large molecule, you actually get a net gain of 2 ATP per pyruvate. So if you use up 2 and you get 4 more, that's a net gain of 2 ATPs through this glycolysis. And a lot of organisms actually, they just don't need oxygen. All they do is use this. And an anaerobic is also known as fermentation. So fermentation. And when we talk about what humans do, keep in mind there's two types of fermentation. There's the alcoholic, which I'm not very familiar with yet, but that's when we harness some organisms' ability to do this respiration and create alcohol, and that's how we make brew alcohol, I think. And the other way is lactic acid, and we should be more concerned about this because humans use it. So what happens is when you're exercising and then your body can't supply enough oxygen for all the respiration you need, we actually use this lactic acid fermentation, so anaerobic respiration. And what happens here is this pyruvate will be converted into lactate. It's also another carbon molecule with three carbons, and that's the lactic acid. And when you feel muscle burn, that's actually the result of the buildup of this lactic acid that accumulated during your exercise. And when you finally get enough oxygen back in here, you can make the lactate. Oh, what happened here? And you can push the lactate back into the pyruvate. So that's how you get rid of muscle burns. But generally, you only get 2 ATP if you only do this glycolysis, so it's not very efficient. And that's why we'll be mostly using aerobic cellular respiration when we can. So cue the next slide. All right, now moving on to aerobic cellular respiration. And I'm just saying I can't believe how simple the SO portion for this part is. So it still starts off with the glycolysis, which takes place in the cytoplasm, of course. And there was a net gain of plus 2 ATP, right? I don't know how to write ATP plus 2. But what happens next is I'm not even gonna bother trying to draw what happens because I'm just gonna insert a screenshot. After glycolysis, which happens in cytoplasm, we go to the Krebs cycle. There's actually a link reaction here. But as I was saying, the SO content is literally so easy, man. There's so much HO content. So if you want to learn more about this very interesting respiration, you can click on the next video in the description and the end screen, the end card. I'll try to put it there too. But what happens in a link reaction is SOs don't need to know. Oh my gosh, it's really infuriating how little they need to know. But after that, it's the Krebs cycle. And what you do need to know, however, I think, is that both of these take place in the matrix of the mitochondria. So mitochondria, it's the energy factor of the cell. So this respiration, actually, a lot of it takes place here. But in this Krebs cycle, it's a cycle. So things get regenerated, and what gets regenerated, SL doesn't even know as well, and that's absolutely crazy to me. But you can see here that only 2 ATPs get have um, produced in glycolysis, and only 2 ATP get produced in the Krebs cycle, and that's not a lot. But what actually is a lot? Okay, both of these take place in the matrix, remember, Krebs cycle and link reaction. But what actually produces a lot of the ATP is the electron transport change, which takes place in this cristae of the mitochondria. And it basically uses all the high energy electrons that are produced in glycolysis and the Krebs cycle to use this energy to create 30 to 34 ATP. So that's actually where most of the ATP come from. And for the SL students, why are there high energy electrons and how does the electron transport chain work? You guys don't even know. So good for you guys. But what HLs do need to know though is everything that happens here, which is arguably like 10 times more complicated. So yeah, well, good for the SLs, I guess. All right, and here are just some things I think will key points to remember about anaerobic and aerobic respiration that will be helpful to both SLs and HL, I think. So first of all, they both start in a cytoplasm. So glycolysis, they both use glycolysis in the cytoplasm. And next of all, you want to know that in about glycolysis, breaks it down to pyruvate, which is the 3-carbon molecule. Glycolysis. Anyways, in anaerobic respiration, it only creates a net gain of +2 ATP, and that's not very high. But if you have oxygen, and then the human body will produce the aerobic. So aerobic is more preferred because it produces more ATP, like more than 30. And you want to remember that the final products of anaerobic respiration are gonna be lactic acid and ATP for the human body. And the lactic acid is why you get muscle burns, of course. And if you're in aerobic respiration, you will get extra carbon dioxide and water. Right. All right. Now we're going to look at some things, the factors that affect the rate of respiration. So first of all, we're going to look at the temperature. So because there's some enzymes involved, the optimal temperature is around 20 to 30 degrees Celsius for respiration. And if you have too high or too low, it'll decrease the rate of the respiration. And we will measure the respiration in experiments using a respirometer. Um, Very certain it won't come up ever on a test, but good to know anyways. Next, the concentrations of different things. So remember in the formula we talked about earlier here. Yeah. So we'll be needing enough glucose to run the formula. If there's not enough things to break down, you can't actually get any energy. And you also need oxygen. So the concentration of both of these, if you don't have enough oxygen, it won't be like aerobic respiration. Yeah. And interesting enough, the carbon dioxide concentration will also affect the cell respiration dioxide, CO2. CO2. And lastly, which is slightly more interesting, the type of cell. So some cells just use more energy than others, and that's okay. But if they require more energy, they will probably have higher cell respiration rates. So these are often used in like experiments. So consider it for your E if you're watching from the future. All right, and I can't believe it, but that's all you need to know for SLs on C1.2 cell respiration. And click there if you want to watch the HL portion of this unit, which is much harder. And I'll see you in the next video, which I'll be making soon, hopefully. And remember to subscribe, and good luck on your test tomorrow.